In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a really simple speed and power tester for your laser when you're working on different materials. It's really important when you're going to a new material or even working with a new laser that you work through and determine what the best speed and power is going to be to give you the optimal results. So what we'll do is we'll come up here and we'll select the square option. We'll hold the shift key and click and drag, and that gives us an equal height and width. I like to set them to be 10, just to give me a common width and height for it. Once that's set, we'll come here and we'll use the option to create an array. I'm going to set it to be 10 columns and 10 rows, and that gives us a nice grid pattern here that we're working with. Go ahead and select all of that, and then I'll zoom in just so we have it kind of here on the screen. Now what we want to do is we want to set each row to be a separate layer. That way we can control the speed. So I'll leave this first one on the first layer. We'll go here, we'll set this one to layer 2. That's actually a 0 index, so row 1, but then we'll just go through and set each of these to the different rows. And what this allows us to do is, for each row, we're going to have it set to a different speed. And that way we can test it that way. And then each column will have the different power percentages. And that allows us to run a single test through everything and ensure that we're getting a good selection for the speed and power whenever we're going to work with material. When you're going through this, you can use the circles if you want to. It all kind of depends on what you want to. The whole key, though, is you want your separate rows and columns, and you want to create this grid of it. So now that these are created, you can see here it actually pulled in the settings I had done before. But what you'll go through each row from bottom to top and adjust your speed. So on this one, I have them set to 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, 350, 400, 450, 500, 550. And I have the speed set to a base power, power set to a base power of 100%. Depending on which material you're working with and what you're trying to do, you want to make sure you adjust that base power and your starting speed based on what you've seen in the documentation for your laser, or if you've worked with a similar material before, you know what worked on there, you can use that as your starting point. The other thing to notice here is the mode for your layers. If you're going to be testing out engraving or etching, you want to make sure your mode is set to fill, and that's going to give you the solid squares to get a good look on how the consistency is of that engraving or etching. In this one, because I'm doing the lower speed and the higher power, it's going to be a cut test. So I'm going to have it set to line mode. That way it just goes around the outer edge of each shape to cut them out. Now what we want to do is, because we have these rows and they're all set to 100%, we've got to go through and select the columns so that we can tell them on the columns that these are going to be certain percentages. So within here, we're going to select that entire column, go to Show Properties, and for the second column, we'll set it to a 90% power scale. For the third column here, we'll set it to an 80% power scale, and then on down through all of these. You can select the entire column, though, and use that power scale to give you an easy way to change all of them. And the end result of this, of course, is when you run this on your material, you're going to have that nice grid where you can tell at a glance exactly which speed and power gave you the optimal setting. You can look through if it didn't quite cut through on 200 at 70%, but it did at the others. Of course, that just tells you exactly what you want to do. Once you go through all this and determine the exact settings that work for each material on your laser, I recommend you save that down there into your library. You can see that at the bottom of the screen here. Let me just finish these last two and I'll kind of show that. 20% and then 10%. So once you go through here, you can see I've gone through here and I have got the settings saved for the different thicknesses of wood, the different types of wood, whether I'm doing acrylic, and everything like that. And then within each one of these, you can see in the cuts, I have it set to whatever millimeter per minute speed and the power that worked best when I did my test cut. By saving those down into the library, you don't have to reference back to a notepad or anything like that. You can very quickly assign those up to your layers whenever you're working with your different materials. And that's really all there is to it. If you have a good idea of what's already going to work for your material, you can go through here and create a separate label for it that just gets engraved on the material to show you the actual speed, the settings it was, as well as the power along the bottom here. more often than not for me, when I'm testing materials, at least starting out with this new laser, I really had no idea what was going to work. So I just had this template up, and then I compared it with the resulting material to kind of collect which item, which row and column gave me the best results to get me exactly what I wanted when I was cutting or etching and engraving. But that's all there is to it. You can go with the circles or the squares. It's whatever you want to for your test shapes. The key is just make sure that each row you adjust your speed, and you can do your passes as well if you want to do a multi-pass cut. And then you select each item in the column and you go to the shape properties for that, and that's where you set the percentages for that. Do keep in mind, it's probably fairly obvious, but if you have your base power set to something other than 100, as an example, when I was doing acrylic, I knew that 100% was going to burn and pop on the acrylic, so I set the base starting power to 50%. The percentages on here are applied to whatever that power max is. So for acrylic, if I had that set to 50, of course, it's going to be 50 and then 45, 40, 35, 30, 25, 20, 15, 10, and 5%. So just keep in mind when you are creating your library and storing off those values, you keep in mind what your power max was. That way you know exactly what the percentages are. It may be often that when you're going through and doing your materials, the exact value isn't exactly on one of these. You don't quite get what you want, but you're really close. And that's where you can just kind of fine tune it in by doing a single row with that speed that you knew worked, and then kind of balance around that one power that gave you almost the exact results to kind of tune it in. And that's for me when I was doing acrylic. I did it like this at first, and the 15% at 3000 speed gave me about what I wanted, but there were a couple pops. And so I did another run at 16, 15, 14, 13, 12 to determine exactly where in there I could tune it in. And that's where I determined, for me on the Atom Stack A5 M50 Pro, the 3000 speed at 14% power gave me the exact result I wanted on the clear acrylic. But that's all there is to it. It's very simple. Once you go through and you create it, you can, of course, save them off. So you can see here in my area, I've got different testers at different speeds with different number of passes. That way, when I'm testing out new materials, if I know it's going to be similar, I can just load one of those as a starting point and go from there rather than having to start from scratch and recreate that new material template. But hopefully that's helpful for some people, and good luck as you're going out there and doing your laser cutting and engraving. Thank you.